everyone! Welcome back to another episode of English Daily Practice. I'm Alex, and today Lana and I are going to talk about one of the most powerful books ever written about money and mindset, Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. It's not just about how to get rich, it's about how to think differently about work, success, and life.
Exactly, Alex. I think that's what makes the book so interesting. It's not a guide that tells you to save a certain amount of money or invest in specific stocks. It's a story about two completely different ways of looking at the world. One that keeps you stuck in financial struggle, and another that sets you free.
Right. I love that it's written as a story about two father figures, Robert's real father, the poor dad, and his best friend's father, the rich dad. Both men cared about him, but their advice about money was totally opposite.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is that both were intelligent and hardworking, but one ended up struggling financially all his life, while the other became one of the richest men in Hawaii. It shows that being smart or educated isn't enough if you don't have the right mindset about money.
That's one of the most eye-opening parts of the book for me. Poor Dad believed in the traditional system. Go to school, get good grades, find a stable job, and climb the career ladder. It's what society teaches most of us.
Totally. He thought that working hard for money was the safe path. But Rich Dad believed that working for money keeps you trapped because you become dependent on your paycheck. He wanted Robert to understand that real freedom comes when your money starts working for you.
Yes, and that's such a different way of thinking. I remember when I first read that, it made me stop and ask myself, am I working to survive or am I learning to create freedom?
Same here. Rich Dad's lessons aren't just about wealth, they're about power. The power to choose how you spend your time. Poor Dad thought job security was the goal. Rich Dad thought financial independence was the goal.
Exactly. And Rich Dad said something like, the poor and the middle class work for money. The rich make money work for them. That single line sums up the entire book.
I think it's also powerful how he taught that financial education is the real education we all need. You can have a degree in engineering or medicine and still not know how to handle money. That's why he said financial literacy is more important than academic success.
That's so true. I mean, we spend years in school learning how to solve equations or write essays, but no one teaches us about managing debt, investing, or creating assets. And that's why people fall into what the book calls the rat race.
Exactly. The rat race is that endless cycle. You work hard, you earn money, you spend it, and then you have to work harder to pay the bills. You think you're improving because your salary increases, but your expenses grow too.
Right. Like every time you get a raise, you upgrade your car, your house, your phone, and suddenly you're back to zero. It's such a trap. And Rich Dad wanted Robert to break out of it by learning the difference between assets and liabilities.
Yes, that's one of the most important lessons in the book. An asset puts money into your pocket, while a liability takes money out. It sounds simple, but most people don't apply it.
Exactly. They think buying a house or a new car makes them richer. But if those things cost money every month instead of bringing in money, they're liabilities. Rich Dad's rule was buy assets first, then use your assets to buy luxuries later.
That's such smart advice, and it completely changes the way you see things. It's not about living cheap or avoiding fun. It's about building a foundation of financial freedom before you spend on comfort.
Yeah, and one of my favorite stories from the book is when Rich Dad had Robert and his friend Mike work at one of his stores for free. Robert got frustrated and complained that he deserved a salary. But that's when Rich Dad said, "If you work for money, you give your power away. Learn to make money work for you."
That line hits hard every time. It's so true that when you only focus on the paycheck, you stop thinking creatively. You don't look for opportunities. You just wait for your next salary.
Exactly. And that's what Rich Dad wanted to change. He wanted Robert to see that opportunities are everywhere. But most people don't see them because they're focused on earning, not learning.
That's a really deep idea. It's like Rich Dad was saying, don't let money control you, you control money. And that's something Poor Dad couldn't understand.
Right, but Rich Dad believed that safety was actually the biggest risk because when you only depend on one income source, like a job, you're always one step away from financial stress.
Exactly. That's why Rich Dad encouraged Robert to learn about investing, real estate, and business, not to make him rich overnight, but to make him independent.
And you know what's cool? The book doesn't tell you to quit your job or become a millionaire tomorrow. It just teaches you to change how you think, to ask better questions.
Yes, like instead of saying, I can't afford it, you ask, how can I afford it? That tiny shift changes everything because it forces your brain to find solutions.
Exactly. That's one of my favorite lessons, too. When you say, I can't, your brain shuts down. When you say, how can I, your brain turns on. It's a mindset of possibility instead of limitation.
And I love that Rich Dad taught through action. He didn't just lecture Robert about money, he gave him real experiences. He made him think, experiment, and sometimes fail so he could actually feel how money works in the real world.
Yeah, and I think that's something we all forget. Real learning doesn't come from reading or listening alone. It comes from doing. Rich Dad's lessons stick because they came from practice, not theory.
And another big part of his teaching was about fear. Rich Dad said fear keeps people poor, not lack of money. People are afraid of losing money, afraid of taking risks, and afraid of being different.
That's so true. Fear and ignorance go hand in hand. When you don't understand money, you fear it. But once you start learning, that fear starts to fade.
Exactly. And I think that's why this book still resonates with millions of readers. It's not just about finance, it's about courage, the courage to think differently from everyone else.
Yes, and that's what I love about it. It makes you question everything you were taught about work, school, and success. It challenges you to stop being comfortable and start being curious.
And curiosity is the first step to freedom, financial and personal. Rich Dad didn't give Robert the answers. He gave him questions that would shape his life forever.
That's the beauty of this book. It's not about how much you earn, but how you think about money, choices, and risk. Rich Dad Poor Dad isn't really a money book, it's a mindset book.
Exactly. And once you understand that, you start noticing how people's financial lives reflect their thinking. Poor dad worked for security. Rich dad worked for freedom. And their results showed it.
That's such a great insight. It's not what you do that defines your wealth, it's how you think while doing it.
Exactly. And that's where everything begins, in your mindset. You know, Alex, one of the things I really admire about Rich Dad, Poor Dad is how it breaks down financial intelligence into something understandable. It's not just about being good with money. Rich Dad explained that financial intelligence is built from learning four key skills: accounting, investing, understanding markets, and knowing the law. At first, I thought those sounded boring and complicated, but when you think about it, those are the exact tools that help you stay in control of your money instead of being controlled by it.
Yes, absolutely. Rich Dad was brilliant at showing how simple ideas can completely change your financial life. Accounting, for example, isn't just about numbers, it's about seeing how money moves. He said that if you don't understand how to read a financial statement, you're like a blind person driving a car. You can be talented and hardworking, but if you don't know where your money is going, you'll eventually crash. That really opened my eyes to the importance of tracking cash flow.
Exactly. I used to think that as long as I wasn't in debt, I was doing fine. But Rich Dad's way of thinking made me realize that just not losing money isn't the same as making money work for you. Financial intelligence is about seeing opportunities, understanding when to take risks, when to wait, and how to protect yourself. Poor Dad always said, play it safe. But Rich Dad said, understand the game before you decide how to play.
I like that idea. Understand the game. Because life really is a financial game, whether we like it or not. Some people play it without knowing the rules, and that's why they keep losing. Rich Dad didn't want Robert to memorize rules. He wanted him to learn how to think strategically. For example, he said rich people don't avoid taxes, they learn how taxes work and they use the system wisely. That's part of the law skill you mentioned earlier.
Yes, and that's something that shocked me the first time I read the book. When Rich Dad said, the rich don't pay taxes the way the poor and middle class do, I was like, wait, what? But when he explained it, it made sense. The rich use corporations and investments to protect and grow their money legally, while employees pay taxes before they even see their income. It's not unfair, it's just knowledge. And the book shows that you can learn it too if you take time to understand.
Exactly. That's what I love. It's empowering. Instead of complaining about how things work, you can learn how to make them work for you. That's what Rich Dad meant when he said that being poor is temporary, but being broke in mindset can last forever. He wanted people to realize that financial freedom doesn't come from luck or inheritance, it comes from learning and taking responsibility.
Right. And he also taught that investing is one of the most powerful tools to achieve freedom. Not gambling, not chasing trends, but real investing, understanding assets that grow in value or produce income. I remember when I first read that part, I thought investing was only for rich people. But Rich Dad explained that anyone can start small, even with little money, as long as they invest in their education and understanding first.
That's so true. I remember that section where he said, the most important investment you can make is in your own mind. That line really stuck with me because most people think of investing as buying stocks or real estate, but Rich Dad meant that if you don't grow your mindset first, you'll lose whatever you invest later. People who don't have financial education often panic when markets go down, and fear makes them lose.
Yes, fear is such a big theme in the book. Rich Dad used to say that the main reason people don't become wealthy is fear. Fear of losing money, fear of being wrong, fear of looking stupid. Poor Dad avoided risk because he was afraid of failure, but Rich Dad embraced failure as part of learning. He said something like, winners are not afraid of losing, but losers are. Failure is part of success. That's such a powerful mindset shift.
It really is. I think about how often people give up after one bad experience. Maybe they start a small business, it fails, and they decide business isn't for me. But Rich Dad would say, you didn't fail, you learned how not to do it. He wanted Robert to see every mistake as a lesson that brings you closer to success. That's the kind of resilience schools rarely teach.
Exactly. And I think that's what separates the financially free from the financially stuck. It's not about intelligence or background, it's about emotional control. Rich Dad taught that money problems are rarely about money itself. They're about how we react to situations. If you panic, you sell too early. If you're greedy, you take the wrong risk. But if you stay calm and curious, you learn and grow.
That's such a good point. It's almost like Rich Dad was teaching emotional intelligence just as much as financial intelligence. Because you can know everything about investments, but if you can't handle pressure, you'll still lose. The book shows that being rich isn't just a skill, it's also a personality you build through discipline and mindset.
Totally. And discipline is key. Rich Dad always said, pay yourself first. That's one of my favorite principles. It means before you pay your bills, before you spend on anything else, you save or invest a portion for yourself, even if it's small. It teaches you to prioritize your financial growth over your expenses. Poor Dad would always say, pay your bills first and save what's left. But the problem is, there's usually nothing left.
Exactly. Paying yourself first sounds small, but it's a habit that builds wealth over time. It forces you to think creatively. If you don't have enough left for bills, it pushes you to find new ways to earn or cut unnecessary costs. It's not about ignoring responsibility, it's about shifting your mindset from scarcity to ownership. You stop saying, I can't afford it, and start saying, how can I afford it?
That's exactly what makes this book timeless. It's not just about numbers, it's about thinking differently. And it's crazy how even small lessons from the book, like understanding assets, managing fear, or paying yourself first, can completely change your financial path if you practice them consistently.
Totally. And I think that's why Rich Dad Poor Dad has become more than just a finance book. It's a mindset revolution. It's taught millions of people to challenge what they were taught, to think independently, and to realize that freedom starts in the mind long before it shows up in the bank account.
Yes, and the best part is that anyone can start. You don't need to be rich or lucky or even highly educated. You just need the willingness to learn and the courage to act. That's what Rich Dad's whole message was about, that financial freedom is a skill, not a gift.
Exactly. You don't wait for the right moment or perfect situation. You start small, you learn, and you keep improving. Rich Dad's mindset teaches us that the goal isn't to make a lot of money, it's to build a life where you're not dependent on it.
That's the real meaning of wealth, not having more things, but having more choices.
Yes, more choices, more freedom, and more time to live the way you want. That's what financial intelligence gives you, the ability to design your own life instead of being trapped by someone else's system.
You know, Alex, one of the biggest lessons from Rich Dad, Poor Dad is how most people spend their whole lives working for money instead of learning how to make money work for them. That line really hit me. It made me realize how school teaches us to be employees, not creators. We're told to study hard, get a good job, and earn a stable salary. But no one teaches us what to do with that money once we earn it. Most people just spend it, hoping someday they'll have enough saved to retire. But Rich Dad said that's not wealth. That's just survival.
Exactly. And I think that's what separates the two dads in the book so clearly. Poor Dad believed in security, in working hard for a paycheck, and climbing the ladder. Rich Dad believed in owning the ladder. He said the rich don't work for money, they build or buy assets that make money for them, even when they're sleeping. That's the mindset shift that completely changes everything. Once you understand that your time is limited, you stop trading it for small paychecks and start looking for leverage.
Yes, and that word, leverage, is so powerful. It means using systems, people, or money in a way that multiplies your effort. Poor Dad would say, work harder. Rich Dad would say, work smarter and create something that works even when you're not there. It's almost like he wanted to teach that true freedom comes from building something that earns for you, a business, an investment, intellectual property, something that keeps growing while you focus on new things.
Exactly. And what's interesting is that Rich Dad didn't hate jobs. He just saw them as temporary training grounds. He used to say, work to learn, not to earn. So instead of chasing promotions, he encouraged Robert to choose jobs that taught him valuable skills, like sales, communication, and leadership. That's something I think most people misunderstand. A job can be good if you're using it to learn how to create your own value later, not just waiting for a raise.
I love that idea. It makes work feel like a classroom instead of a prison. It's also comforting to know that you can start small. You don't need a big company or a ton of money to begin. You can build your financial intelligence even while you're working a normal job. The key is to use your income to buy assets, not liabilities.
Right, and that's another major concept, understanding the difference between assets and liabilities. It sounds simple, but it's actually life-changing once you get it. Rich Dad defined an asset as something that puts money into your pocket, and a liability as something that takes money out. It's crazy how many people think their house or car is an asset, when in reality, it costs them money every month.
That's so true. People get so caught up in appearances. They buy expensive cars, designer clothes, big houses, thinking it shows success. But Rich Dad said that's what keeps the middle class stuck. They increase their expenses as soon as they increase their income, and they call that progress. But the rich buy assets first, then use the income from those assets to buy luxuries later.
Exactly. It's like building a money machine before spending on comfort. I remember when Robert wrote that the rich focus on acquiring assets like real estate, stocks, or businesses. Poor Dad focused on job security and saving. It's not that saving is bad, it's just that saving alone won't make you rich, especially when inflation keeps eating away at your money. Rich Dad believed that financial education helps you grow money, not just protect it.
I completely agree. And that's where emotions come into play, especially fear and desire. Rich Dad explained that most people are trapped in what he called the rat race because of those two emotions. Fear of not having money makes people work harder, and desire for more stuff makes them spend what they earn. It's an endless loop. They work, earn, spend, worry, and repeat, all without realizing that money has started controlling them.
Yes, that part was so deep. When I first read it, I realized I had been living exactly like that. Every month felt like a chase. Work to pay bills, then feel relief for a few days, then stress again as the next bills come in. Rich Dad said that people who don't learn about money will always work for those who do. That really stuck with me. It made me want to take control of my finances instead of letting fear control me.
Same here. I think that's what makes the book so eye-opening. It's not just financial advice, it's psychological. It teaches you to think independently, manage fear, and act confidently. Once you master those skills, money becomes a reflection of your growth, not your worth.
So true. I think that's the most freeing part, realizing that financial freedom isn't about the amount of money you have, but how you think and behave with it. When you understand that, you stop being afraid of losing money because you know you can always rebuild. You've learned the skills, and no one can take that away from you.
Exactly. Knowledge is the real asset. Rich Dad always emphasized that the more you learn, the more opportunities you see. That's why he encouraged Robert to read books, attend seminars, and learn from mistakes instead of avoiding them. Every experience, good or bad, teaches you how to make smarter financial choices.
Yes, and that's something we can all apply in our lives. Even small things like understanding how interest works, or how to budget, or how to invest a little each month can change your financial future completely. The key is to start learning, not waiting.
Absolutely. I think the biggest takeaway is that financial freedom starts with awareness. Awareness of how money flows, how we think about it, and how we react to it emotionally. Once you start seeing money as a game you can learn instead of a mystery you fear, everything changes.
Well said, Lana.
That's exactly what Rich Dad wanted people to realize, that anyone can learn the rules of money if they're willing to take the first step.
You know, Alex, one of my favorite parts of Rich Dad, Poor Dad is when Robert describes the rat race. It's such a simple metaphor, but it captures modern life so accurately. Most people wake up, go to work, earn money, pay bills, maybe buy a few things to feel good, and then do the same thing again next month. It's like a hamster running endlessly on a wheel, always moving but never going anywhere new. The saddest part is many people don't even realize they're in that race because it feels normal.
That's so true. The rat race is invisible until you start questioning it. Rich Dad taught that escaping it doesn't happen by working harder, it happens by changing how you think about money. Poor Dad's mindset was all about earning more. Get a promotion, work overtime, find a higher paying job. But Rich Dad said that approach just tightens the cage because your expenses grow with your income. The real escape happens when your passive income, the money your assets generate, becomes greater than your living costs. That's when you're finally free.
Exactly. It's like breaking a cycle. Instead of chasing money, you build systems that make money chase you. And that doesn't mean becoming instantly rich or starting a giant company overnight. It starts small, maybe buying a rental property, investing in dividend stocks, or even building a small online business. The point is, you slowly shift from working for money to building something that works for you. That's how freedom starts, not from luck, but from small, smart choices repeated over time.
And what's so interesting is how Rich Dad described building assets almost like planting trees. You don't see results right away. At first, it's slow, even boring. You have to nurture it, protect it, and wait. But one day, that tree starts giving you fruit, and then shade, and eventually a whole forest grows. The people still in the rat race don't see the forest. They just see the effort in planting the seed and think it's too much work. But the wealthy think long term. They know patience pays off in ways a paycheck never can.
That's such a beautiful way to see it. And it also connects to how Rich Dad valued time more than money. Poor Dad traded time for money. Rich Dad used money to buy back his time. That's something that really changed how I view success. Because at the end of the day, what's the point of having more money if you have less time to enjoy it? Financial freedom isn't just about wealth. It's about control over your hours, your energy, and your choices.
Exactly. Freedom of time is the ultimate goal. Rich Dad always said that being rich is not about having millions. It's about having enough income from your assets to live the life you want without depending on anyone else. That's what escaping the rat race truly means, being able to decide how you spend your day. And that kind of freedom is something no job title can give you.
Right. And another powerful lesson was how Rich Dad always emphasized financial literacy. He said most people lose money because they don't understand it. They might earn a lot, but they don't know how to manage, grow, or protect what they earn. It's like trying to play a game without knowing the rules. You might get lucky for a while, but eventually you lose. That's why he taught Robert to read financial statements, understand cash flow, and know the difference between income, expenses, assets, and liabilities.
Yes, that's such an underrated skill. I remember when I first looked at a simple cash flow diagram from the book. It was so clear. The poor have income flowing straight to expenses. The middle class have income that goes to liabilities they think are assets, and the rich have income flowing into assets that then produce more income. It's such a small shift in understanding, but it completely changes your financial reality.
It's true. And once you understand that flow, you can see how your decisions affect your future. Every purchase, every debt, every investment, It all either moves you closer to freedom or keeps you stuck in the cycle. That's why Rich Dad said financial education isn't about numbers, it's about mindset. Once your mind learns to recognize opportunities, you start seeing them everywhere. A new skill, a business idea, a smarter way to save or invest.
Exactly. And that's the difference between the rich and everyone else. The rich don't see problems, they see opportunities. Poor dad would look at a price tag and say, I can't afford it. Rich dad would ask, how can I afford it? That question changes everything because it forces your brain to think creatively instead of shutting down. It's a mindset of curiosity rather than limitation.
I love that. How can I afford it? It's such a simple question, but it makes your brain work in new ways. Instead of feeling powerless, you start taking control. It's the same with learning new skills. Rich Dad encouraged Robert to learn things that scared him, like sales, negotiation, or investing. Not because they were easy, but because they built confidence. That confidence becomes your real wealth.
Exactly. Confidence is a kind of invisible currency. Once you believe in your ability to learn and adapt, you stop fearing financial challenges. Rich Dad used to say that every failure teaches you something valuable, and the only real risk is doing nothing. Most people avoid investing or starting something new because they fear losing money, but by avoiding risk, they actually lose the chance to grow.
That's so true. And honestly, it reminds me of how school trains us to fear mistakes. We're punished for getting answers wrong, so we grow up thinking failure means we're not smart. But Rich Dad flipped that idea completely. He said that mistakes are lessons. The more mistakes you make, the more you learn, as long as you reflect and adjust. That's how entrepreneurs think.
Yes, and that's why Rich Dad called financial education real-world education. It's not about memorizing formulas, it's about learning through experience, trying, failing, adapting, and improving. He believed that's how you build the kind of intelligence that makes money work for you.
And the beautiful thing is, anyone can start at any time. You don't need to be born into wealth or have a fancy degree. You just need curiosity, discipline, and a willingness to learn. Even reading Rich Dad, Poor Dad is a step towards financial freedom because it changes how you think.
Yes, and once you start thinking differently, you naturally act differently. You start questioning expenses, avoiding unnecessary debt, and seeking ways to grow your income. You begin valuing education more than entertainment, and opportunities start showing up in unexpected places.
Exactly. It's almost like you reprogram your mind. Before, money was something stressful, something you chased or worried about. But once you understand it, money becomes like a partner. You learn to respect it, use it wisely, and let it work for you. That's when you stop being a slave to it.
And that's the ultimate freedom, isn't it? Not just having wealth, but having peace of mind. Being able to wake up and know that you're in control, not your bills, not your boss, not your fear. That's what Rich Dad wanted people to learn. Not how to get rich quick, but how to think rich for life.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes this book timeless. It's not about money, it's about mindset. Once your mindset changes, your entire life starts to follow.
Couldn't agree more, Lana. That's why Rich Dad, Poor Dad isn't just a finance book, it's a guide to freedom.
You know, Alex, one thing that really stood out to me in Rich Dad, Poor Dad was how Rich Dad viewed investing. He said investing isn't about gambling or luck. It's about education and observation. Most people are scared of investing because they think it's too risky. But Rich Dad taught that ignorance is the real risk. Once you understand how money works, investing actually becomes less dangerous than working for a paycheck your whole life.
Exactly. And the irony is, people think their jobs are safe, but in reality, jobs can disappear overnight. A company can fail, the economy can crash, or automation can replace roles, and then what? The rich prepare for that by creating multiple streams of income. They don't rely on one employer. They rely on themselves, on their knowledge, and on the assets they build. Rich Dad used to say, the more you know, the less you fear. And that's true in everything, especially money.
Right. It's about financial courage. Most people wait for the perfect time to start investing or learning, but that perfect time never comes. Rich Dad said, opportunities are like buses. There's always another one coming. The trick is to be ready when it arrives. That's why he always told Robert to learn skills instead of chasing paychecks. Because when you're skilled and knowledgeable, every crisis looks like an opportunity in disguise.
That's such an important mindset. Poor Dad believed in job security. Go to school, get good grades, and find a stable job. But Rich Dad believed in financial security. Build assets that pay you no matter what happens. And that's the difference between surviving and thriving. The poor and middle class depend on someone else to provide stability, while the rich create it for themselves.
And what's beautiful about that idea is that it empowers people. You don't need to wait for someone to give you a raise or a promotion. You can start learning, investing, and building something of your own. Even small things like starting a side hustle, learning about the stock market, or creating digital products can grow into something powerful over time. The hardest part is taking the first step.
Exactly. Rich Dad said, start small, dream big. You don't need to buy a building or a company. You can start with your own education. Maybe read a book about investing, watch a free course, or try something simple like understanding your cash flow. The rich take small, consistent actions that lead to big results. The poor wait for big chances that never come.
And that's why I think fear is the biggest enemy in this whole topic. Rich Dad said that fear and greed are what control most people's financial lives. They fear losing money, so they avoid opportunities. Then they get greedy when they see others making money and jump in too late. But the wealthy learn to manage their emotions. They understand that losing is part of learning, and they stay calm when others panic.
That's one of the most powerful lessons in the book, that emotional intelligence is more important than financial knowledge. You can know all the numbers, but if you panic when prices drop, you'll make bad decisions. Rich Dad always told Robert, money flows to the patient and prepared. It's not about timing the market, it's about time in the market, staying consistent, disciplined, and informed.
Exactly. And he also said something that really stuck with me. If you want to go somewhere, it's best to find someone who has already been there. That's why mentors are so important. Poor Dad believed in learning from books and degrees. Rich Dad believed in learning from experience, from people who had already succeeded. And that's what this book is, a shortcut to understanding how rich people think.
I love that quote too. It shows that success leaves clues. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You just need to follow the path others have walked and adapt it to your situation. I think one of the reasons Rich Dad, Poor Dad is so relatable is because it doesn't promise quick riches. It teaches responsibility, how to think long-term, how to manage fear, and how to make decisions with purpose.
And that's what separates the people who get rich from those who just dream about it. Everyone wants financial freedom, but few are willing to learn the skills or face the discomfort needed to get there. Rich Dad always said that comfort is the enemy of growth. If you're too comfortable, you're not learning. And if you're not learning, you're falling behind.
So true. And I think a big part of that is how we view failure. For the poor and middle class, failure is something to be avoided. But for the rich, failure is just part of the process. Rich Dad used to tell Robert, don't fear losing money, fear not trying. Every successful person you meet has failed many times. The difference is they didn't stop there. They used each failure as a lesson.
Yes, and that's why I think financial freedom isn't about luck. It's about resilience. You might make a bad investment or a wrong decision, but if you stay in the game, you'll eventually learn what works. The real failure is quitting after the first loss. The rich don't quit, they adjust. That's what makes them rich in both money and mindset.
And I think that's where financial intelligence really shines, in adapting. The economy changes, technologies change, jobs change, but financial intelligence helps you stay flexible. It's not about memorizing facts, it's about learning principles, like how to identify value, manage risk, and make smart choices. Once you understand those, you can thrive anywhere, in any situation.
Yes, and I think that's the message that should give people hope. You don't have to be born into wealth or have special connections. You just need to start thinking differently. That's what Rich Dad, Poor Dad is really about. It's not about money, it's about mindset. Once you change how you think about money, your entire relationship with it changes.
Absolutely. And you start seeing opportunities where others see problems. You start seeing money as a tool, not a goal. And that shift alone can change your entire life. Because once you learn to control your money, instead of letting money control you, you start building real freedom, not just financial, but emotional too.
Exactly. And maybe that's the most important takeaway. That true wealth isn't measured by how much money you have, but how free you are. Free to choose, to explore, to live your life on your own terms. That's what Rich Dad wanted people to realize. Wealth is a mindset before it's a bank account.
That's beautifully said, Lana. And it's true. Once your mind becomes rich, the rest follows naturally.
You know, Alex, the more I think about it, the more I realize that Rich Dad, Poor Dad is less about money and more about habits of the mind. The rich and the poor aren't separated by how much they earn, but by how they think and act every single day. Poor Dad worked hard and saved what he could, but his mindset kept him stuck. He believed safety was more important than opportunity. Rich Dad, on the other hand, took smart risks, learned constantly, and used his mind as his greatest asset.
That's such an important point. The mind really is the most powerful tool we have. Rich Dad said that our greatest wealth or our greatest poverty starts in our thoughts. If we think money is evil, we'll avoid it. If we think it's impossible to be rich, we'll never even try. It's like programming a computer. If your mental code says stay poor, then no matter how hard you work, you'll find ways to stay there. But if your thoughts say, I can learn this, I can grow, your entire system starts changing.
Exactly. And I think that's why Robert wrote the book the way he did, by contrasting his two dads. It's not to make one look better than the other, but to show that we all have these two voices in our heads. One tells us to play it safe and follow the crowd, while the other tells us to think bigger, to take control of our lives. The moment we start listening to the second voice, the rich mindset, everything changes.
Yes, and what's amazing is that this mindset shift affects everything beyond money too. Once you start believing you can grow financially, you also start believing you can grow personally, socially, intellectually. You stop waiting for permission and start creating your own opportunities. That's what Rich Dad called becoming the master of your own life. It's not arrogance, it's empowerment.
And I think it all starts with self-awareness. Rich Dad always told Robert to look at where his money goes. Because where your money flows, your priorities show. If you spend everything on comfort or appearance, that says something about what you value. But if you invest in books, courses, or businesses, it shows you're planting seeds for your future. Awareness is the first step toward change.
Absolutely. It reminds me of that line from the book. It's not how much money you make, it's how much money you keep. Most people focus only on income, not on management. They think making more will solve everything, but without discipline, they just spend more. That's why Rich Dad taught budgeting, asset growth and delayed gratification. He knew that control brings freedom.
I love that concept, delayed gratification. It's not about denying yourself joy. It's about choosing future freedom over short-term pleasure. The rich understand that small sacrifices today create big rewards tomorrow. And that doesn't just apply to money. It applies to learning, fitness, relationships, almost everything meaningful in life.
Yes, exactly. And what's interesting is how this connects back to emotional control. Poor Dad taught Robert to avoid risk. Rich Dad taught him to manage risk. The difference between fear and control is knowledge. The more you learn, the less emotional you become when facing challenges. You start seeing financial ups and downs as normal, part of the process, not as signs to panic.
And that's what I think most people miss. They want freedom without responsibility. But Rich Dad said the two go hand in hand. You can't be financially free without being financially responsible. Freedom isn't about doing whatever you want. It's about having the power to make choices wisely. It takes effort, but the reward is incredible. Peace of mind, confidence, and stability.
You're completely right. Rich Dad believed that once you take full responsibility for your financial situation, no excuses, no blame, that's the moment you begin your journey to wealth. Because you stop waiting for someone else to fix your problems. You realize you have the power to change things. That's a mindset shift money alone can't buy.
It's so empowering when you think about it that way. Everyone has the ability to take that first step. Read one book, learn one skill, start one small investment. Each small action adds up. That's what Rich Dad meant when he said, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with financial education." You don't have to be perfect, you just have to begin.
And I think that's the real spirit of the book, to inspire people to take ownership of their learning. Rich Dad never told Robert exactly what to do. He taught him how to think. He gave him questions, not answers. Because real growth happens when you start finding your own answers. It's the same for all of us. Once we start asking better questions about money, we find better opportunities.
Exactly. And it's amazing how much we can change when we start thinking differently. I mean, look at people who used to live paycheck to paycheck, but changed their mindset. They start tracking their expenses, learning to invest, maybe starting a small business. And in just a few years, they're financially independent. It's not magic, it's mindset and consistent action.
And what's even more beautiful is that once you become financially literate, you can help others. Rich Dad always said that true wealth is not about how much you have, but how much you can give. When you're free, you can teach, support, and lift others up. That's how you make a real difference.
That's so true. When people see someone like them succeeding, it inspires hope. It shows that financial freedom isn't reserved for the lucky few. It's possible for anyone who's willing to learn and take action. That's what makes Rich Dad Poor Dad so powerful. It speaks to everyone, no matter where they start.
Yes, and I think the biggest takeaway is that wealth is not about luck, inheritance, or intelligence. It's about choices. The choices you make every day, what to learn, how to spend, how to react, and how to grow. Every financial decision shapes your future. The earlier you take control, the sooner you build freedom.
Exactly, Alex. And maybe that's the message we should leave everyone with. Don't wait for the perfect moment to start changing your life. Start today with what you have, where you are. Learn, grow, and make better choices one step at a time. Because the sooner you start thinking like the rich, the sooner you stop living like the poor.
Well said, Lana. That's the real lesson of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It's not about being rich, it's about being free. Free from fear, from dependence, from limits. Once you understand that, money becomes a tool, not a master. And that's when your real life begins.
Exactly. And financial freedom starts in your mind, and then it shows up in your life. So, to everyone listening, start with knowledge, stay consistent, and never stop learning. You'll be amazed how far that mindset can take you.
Perfectly said. And as always, thank you for joining us today. I hope this conversation inspires you to look at money in a new way, not with fear, but with curiosity and confidence. Because once you take control of your mind, wealth naturally follows.
Yes, and don't forget, it's not about how fast you go, but about staying on the path. Every small step counts. We'll see you in the next episode.